I'm down in Irvine. This is my Irvine email, cui.edu. I'm very reachable. If you ever have anything to say to me or about me, or questions to ask or anything like that, I'd be very happy to continue engaging conversation about the things that I teach at Concordia University, Irvine. I'm called there as a dual role. I'm in Christ College because I'm a pastor in Synod, and that means I'm qualified to teach New Testament and Old Testament, Greek, Latin. We do our church vocations, our theology, and our classical languages and philosophy in Christ College. And I'm also in the Department of History and Political Thought, chaired by Dr. Adam Francisco, who's my colleague and friend. We were hired in the same year. And every history department needs an ancient guy, and that's me. I'm trained as a classicist, but we'd have no classics department, so to speak, at Concordia University, Irvine. And by classics department, what I mean is those studies, area studies essentially, of the Mediterranean world from about, say, 3000 BC, ballpark, to about, say, 476 AD, right? Not to put too fine a point on it. It was on a Tuesday. So the 5,500 years of history and art and literature and architecture and archaeology now, and social science and mathematics and harder sciences. All of that is encompassed by what we call classics, and that's what my degree is in. I got my PhD from University of California, Irvine, finished a dissertation on Ovid's Metamorphoses and catalog poetry of the Hellenistic world in 2012 while I was still adjuncting at Cal State Long Beach, at University of California, Irvine, and at Concordia University, who graciously gave me a job, even though I work on Ovid. About 2006, when I was still in the midst of getting exams done for my coursework at UC Irvine, I was having lunch with Jack Preuss. It was Oktoberfest at the St. Paul's Lutheran Church in Pomona, California, where I had been attending as a member. The pastor there was a guy named Joel Shaltanis. You know Phaedra, if you teach here. Okay, I was at their church in Pomona, which is why I preached for him at Lord of Life down the street here on Sunday. Also, he wanted a day off. So I was there at Oktoberfest. Jack Preuss, then president of Concordia University, Irvine, said, hey, so how are things going with PhD work? And what are you working on? I said, things are all right, and I work on Ovid. And he just shook his head over his bratwurst. He said, we don't need an Ovidian. I said, that's why classics is perfect for Concordia University, because it's the perfect area studies degree. You learn everything from numismatics to text criticism to how to parse a Greek verb to how to think, how to structure your mind. As I look at Miss Bogle's Why Study Latin board and think about building a foundation to learn how language structures work and creating familiarity for complex systems. This is essentially my apologia for the study of Latin in every place that I've ever adjuncted in higher ed, okay? And also for the junior high kids, the high school kids, the elementary kids that I teach as well. So I love the classical world. I love classics. I don't get to teach in a department of classics, but I get to teach about the Peloponnesian War. I get to teach the fifth declension from time to time. And when I'm really lucky, I get to teach the greatest poet who ever lived, and that's Ovid, Publius Ovidius Naso. So today, my intention is to look a little bit at Metamorphoses, and especially one episode at the beginning of the 6th book of the Metamorphoses. And for those of you who are familiar with this epic, it was written about 1 BC to 4 AD, somewhere around there. It's a 15-book epic. This is in the third of the 15 books, 1 through 5, 6 through 10, 11 to 15, and it covers the celebrated story of Minerva and Arachne. Minerva, the Roman version of, what's her face? Athena! Born fully formed and fully armed out of the head of Zeus, right? The goddess of justice, the goddess of war, goddess of wisdom, goddess of weaving, right? And that's why she decides to set her eyes on the fate, the miserabile fatum Arachnis, the miserable fate, the wretched fate of Arachne, her doom, because she's a weaver. And it's a story that you know, and if you don't, I've offered a translation or a couple in the packet that's out there. And again, if you came in late and you want one of those packets, I don't have any more. I got it made 20. I didn't think this would be popular. But I've got it available for you on my own Google Drive, and I can just share it with you willy-nilly, and no problem. Make certain you get that by the end of today, okay? Let's see. So a little bit about Publius Ovidius Naso. 43 BC to 17 AD, lived in Rome all the way up until 8 AD, and then he was relegated, that is exiled, banished to Romania, a city named Tomis. What he says in the Tristia when he's talking about this in his exile poetry later on is that Augustus didn't like him because of Carmen et error, because of a song and a mistake. And we've been speculating for a couple of thousand years about what that mistake might have been. We're not exactly certain. But a Carmen, we know what that Carmen was because he's pretty explicit about that. Or at least from his own point of view. What the song was, the poem was, that got him on the bad side of a moralist like Augustus Caesar. And it was one of his earlier works, one of his, what we would call in the business, an erotic work, because it was about eros, that is, about love, creative and procreative love. It was a didactic work, funny enough, called the Ars Amatoria, The Art of Love, 3 books. That's pretty scandalous in parts, but an interesting poetic experiment. But scandalous enough that it finally became the excuse to get him out of Dodge City and out to the barbarians. He wrote several books, 5 books of love poetry. The Amores, that he re-edited into 3 books later on in his career. He wrote, as I mentioned, the Art of Love, the Ars Amatoria, 2 books directed at a male audience, and then a 3rd book directed towards a female audience, and then a Remedia Amoris for those who figured out that love doesn't work. And now you're sad. You need to get over the fact that she dumped you. Wrote a new inventive genre of poetry, poetic letters from heroines to heroes of mythology and history, and he called them the Heroides. He wrote a didactic work on the proper application of makeup called the Medicamina Faciae Feminae that exists only in fragment. He wrote, get this, a Roman tragedy. It's called the Medea. It was about Medea, and we don't have it anymore. That'd make your career if you're tripping around Egypt and tripped over a mummy and found a wrapping and said, oh my gosh, this is Ovid's tragedy, Medea. We don't have it anymore. A serious, serious loss to ancient literature. He wrote a calendar, the so-called fasti, or a celebration of the various rites and ceremonies, festivals of the Roman calendar. It takes us from January to June, and we don't have July to December, interestingly. And then once he was banished, he wrote several books of exile poetry in iambic pentameters, the Tristia, the sorrows of an exile, and then epistolary letters, epistolary letters. That's called a tautology. That's also called, I forget what I was saying. Poetic epistles, I should say. They're the epistulae ex ponto, that is, the letters from the Black Sea, the Euxine. And that ends his career. It was an extraordinary poetic career from an extraordinary poet who, as I say, is the greatest poet alive. Now, I know you're going to say, no, come on, in Latin it was Virgil. T.S. Eliot told us that. He wrote a whole book called What Makes a Classic, and he delivered it as a lecture to the Virgilian Society. And the answer they came up with, guess, Virgil's a classic, and that's the only one. Isn't that amazing that that would come out? That's like me saying, hey, guess who the right Christians are? The Lutherans. It's a Lutheran thing, right? Anyway, Virgil is fantastic. I'm not going to knock him. But he hadn't perfected the hexameter. That's the epic meter in which Homer wrote in Greek, but the Romans had trouble translating into their own native tongue. So Virgil was the greatest example up to then. Lucretius was fantastic, hard to read. Virgil, improvement, and not as easy as Ovid, because Ovid perfected their hexameter, and it's beautiful. And what does he decide to do with it? He doesn't give us a heroic epic with arma virumque cano, arms in the man I sing. He gives us changes. He gives us metamorphosis. He gives us what today would be in comic books and superheroes and things like that. He gives us the Alexandrian equivalent to cartoons. He gives us something that shouldn't be held to be serious at all, but he makes it the most beautiful thing ever. You're not supposed to put epic with metamorphosis. That's like putting peanut butter in your chocolate, chocolate in your peanut butter. Remember that? But it turns out it's two great tastes taste great together. And Ovid did it. It's a tour de force. Books 1 to 5 of this epic, the Metamorphoses, have to do with cosmogony and the major mythologies of Arcadia and Thebes and Athens, Argos. And it ends with the Pierides in their conclusion as they battle the muses in song. In books 1 through 5, it's a little difficult to read with younger kids because there's a lot of shenanigans going on. Jupiter is a god who has amours, divine love affairs with mortal women. But that's where heroes come from in Greek mythology. We can't get away from that. That's one of the things that's scandalous, frankly, about teaching the pagans, yeah? This is something that early Christian apologists had to deal with as well. It's also something, frankly, that Basil of Caesarea, our wonderful Cappadocian father, says, yeah, we need to read these stories, otherwise we're not going to be able to understand the Bible. I'm not saying you got to believe it. You got to dish that weirdness. But don't Bowdlerize the text. If you don't know how to read those, you're not going to know how to read David. You're not going to know how to read Moses, and you're not going to know how to read Jesus. The leaves that shade the fruit so that you can enjoy the scriptures. This is why we read the pagan poets. More on that later if you got questions. And more on that, again, throughout not just the next hour or the next several hours or days, but this ought to be an ongoing conversation. I know it's going to be through our conversations about classical ed. But that's 1 through 5. Books 6 through 10, where our episode today comes at the head, is a retrospect on the first 5 of those books. And it's these tapestries that are woven between the divine combatant, Minerva, and the mortal combatant, Arachne. Minerva creates a tapestry that is classically centered and symmetrical and ordained to demonstrate her own power and the foolishness of mortals who would have hubris over against gods. And Arachne, the mortal, she develops a tapestry that, as Ovid describes it, spins out just how foolish the gods are, how deceptive, and how capricious and how dastardly human, anthropomorphic they really are, which is offensive to anybody who would actually worship these gods, so-called. It's really a retrospect on those first 5 books of the Metamorphoses from a human perspective. And those next 5 books, 6 through 10, offer other tales of humans and heroes, including the famous stories of Niobe and Tereus and Thisbe, Jason and Medea, Theseus, Cyrus, the tales of Achelous in Book 8 and the Caledonian boar hunt, Hercules and Byblis and Iphis, and it ends with Orpheus's song in Book 10 as conclusion. Remember Orpheus, he married Eurydice, she died on the wedding day, and he went down to Hades and played and said, hey, I really want her back. Amor vincit omnia, and all the gods of the underworld say, yeah, okay, you can take her back, but she can't look back. She can't look back. If you can't look back at her, otherwise she turns into a pillar of salt or whatever. That's just. And so he brings her back up to the upper world, and he looks back, and she says, bye-bye, and Wale, the twice dead. And so he's so sad that he sings love songs all through Book 10, including one of the very few happy ending metamorphoses, the story of Pygmalion and his ivory girl that he finally prays, I want one like my ivory girl, and he kisses her, and all of a sudden, she can speak English the right way, right? Because that's a fair lady. Yeah. Henry Huggins and all that. Okay, so book 11 through 15 then takes Ovid up through recent history. It's the lead up to the Trojan War, the discussion, the argument over the arms of Achilles. We get the travels of Aeneas through book 13 and 14 and the Sicilian tales, and then our dip into indigenous Roman myth, the stories of Vertumnus and Pomona, and finally in book 15, Numa's conversation with a pre-Socratic philosopher, right, Pythagoras, that covers the entire book. That says nothing about triangles, says a lot about vegetarianism. Interesting, right? So that's how the entire epic goes. And I did that in 5 minutes. That ain't bad. That ain't bad. Ovid takes 15 books to do it, and it's phenomenal. It's phenomenal. So as such, book 6, what we're going to focus most of our attention on today, I'm going to sandwich some other commentary in with this, but as such, book 6 occupies a place of transition between the world of divine amours and the mythologies of the heroes who come out of those unions. You can't do the great story of Perseus and the Gorgon, Medusa, and Pegasus and all that without realizing that there was a Danae and a golden shower somewhere. So it's kind of weird. But book 6 is the transition between those older stories and then the human heroes that come out of those unions. It's a place of questioning divine machinery and human ingenuity. It's a place of questioning human hubris and divine vindictiveness. These are huge, epic questions, even in the context of metamorphosis. And that's encapsulated here in a brilliant tale that stands alone as well as it suggestively reflects the epic's concern for the role of art in delivering those goods. When we read the Arachne and Minerva tale, and incidentally, now that I've given you some time to read through the outline or read through, I've given you a couple of English translations of it. If you're unfamiliar with the tale, you can take a look. But some of you probably don't need to. You feel like you know it. If you know the tale, raise your hand. If you know the basic story, raise your hand. There's a few of you. Wonderful. I want you to get some more out of that. Have you ever told it to kids, high school age, middle school age, youngers? Did you hear it when you were a little kid? See, I heard mythology since I was just a itty bitty kid. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. That's why I'm talking today. But when we read the Arachne tale, especially with students elementary to middle school age, we're reading, I want you to be able to think about this. We're reading a story about art and the manufacture of art, art being the work that some people do. We're reading about a troubling mythology of divine and human interaction. How do humans and gods interact? It's one of the basic questions that the Old Testament presents us on any read. When we're reading this story, we're reading about the troubling mythology of divine human interaction, and we're also reading about poetics, how we write poetry, how we read poetry, how we think about things. That's my own interest in my research. But what we usually, when we're dealing with any kind of mythology, any kind of ancient mythology with kids, whether that's kinders or fourth graders or even high schoolers, when we do mythology, we usually begin and end simply with etiology. Etiology. You know what etiology is, or an etiological read of myth. This is the part where you participate, so I can take a breath. Pardon? The moral of it? The moral of it, yeah. There is a moral read to mythology. That's a sort of a subset of... It explains something, yeah. We know that there's a rainbow because of the gods in need of a highway, right? And so they have this rainbow that they go from here to there with, right? Or we know why there's earthquakes, because we got Siphion underneath Sicily going, and all of a sudden Etna blows up, right? We've got an etiology that is a source from itia, right? Ition, a cause, or a source. And that's not all that's there in mythology. Myth itself is just a telling of a tale. Myth itself is simply a telling of a tale, and we tell tales all the time. The power of myth to get at something important has to do with just how important those things are that the myth is representing. And every culture has one, and we're never going to get away from it. The hard part about dealing with myth, of course, as we inherit that vocabulary in English, is especially the late 19th through the 20th century using the word myth, the vocabulary of myth, mythos, to denote a falsehood, something that is untrue. I think we need to reclaim myth. I'm not alone with that. You're probably much more familiar with literature that would attempt to reclaim myth narrative. There's a good chapter written by my friend Andrew Deloach in one of the books you can see downstairs on resurrection, myth or fact. And it turns out, yeah, a little bit of both, but not what we mean by falsehood, what we mean by the telling of it. There's a reason that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and Paul talk seriously in a carefully crafted narrative about the importance of an empty grave in Palestine. Okay, so that's what I mean by myth. What we usually begin and end with is, hey, this is where spiders come from. Aren't those Romans silly? That's to empty this poetry of much of its power and much of its beauty. Oh, no, we can't do that. That's what another really good thing, of dealing with an ancient language at a young age is, because it offers a slower reading, a careful reading, and an opportunity simply to appreciate. We can reclaim that verb as well. Appreciate art. There's so much more going on here than just, there's where spiders come from. And that's true of most great works of art and literature from the ancient world, which is why I'm a classicist, and why I'm talking today about a classical work as classicists think about classics today, rather than the related topic of classical education, because I don't know that I'm much of a pedagogue, and you're probably looking at me saying, yeah, I don't think you're either. I make no claims of being a great teacher. I talk too fast. I don't make enough handouts. I use my a whiteboard when I'm embarrassed and I would want to turn my back at people. But I do not assume that you do classics in classical education. I do not assume that you do ancient Greek poetry, ancient Roman prose. I do not assume that you're doing a heavy dose of ancient world, because classical education is distinct from classics, whatever your own context and idiom may be. But I encourage you to. I wouldn't have, had it not been for my 4th grade teacher. And you know who she is, because everybody should know the best teacher ever. It's Mrs. Roth, Natalie Roth. I went to public school, Phoenix, Arizona, Deer Valley School District, Glendale, Arizona. And I was in 4th grade, and she said, hey, anybody who wants to come early, 7:30 instead of 8:30, what we're going to do Latin. I said, wow, nobody does that. So there's 6 of us. This is a public school. There's 500 people at the school, but the 6 of us. We showed up at 7:30 a.m. Well, we didn't learn uzi, no. She was just teaching us vocabulary and talking about Rome and stuff like that. I was like, yeah, I know some of that little notebook. My first little Latin notebook. Had to memorize some vocabulary. It was great. And we did that for a semester. It wasn't a formal Latin class. I didn't continue on with it until my freshman year of college at University of Arizona. But you know what she did the next semester? She said, well, anybody who wants to show up, 7:30, we're going to do ancient Greek theater. 4th graders. So I don't know what that is. So we came. We learned about Aeschylus and Sophocles and the Trojan War and the cycle and all that, and the Oresteia. And we even put that on. We wore togas, bed sheets, Star Wars on, and we spray painted our flip-flops gold, and we each got a part. And we did the Oresteia, man, with 4th graders. I got to be Aegisthus. You know who Aegisthus is? That's the cousin who has the affair with Clytemnestra while she's having an affair with him to get back at Agamemnon, who's killed the daughter, and his son is going to come and slay him. It was great. 4th grade, and I had 2 lines. One of them was, for your love, my queen, I would do anything. And I would have, too, because it was Tina Haddon. She was playing Clytemnestra. And she's 6th grade, and she was beautiful. I don't know what ever happened to Tina Haddon. And then my second and last line was, because Orestes gets me in the end, all right? Lance Whiteside played Orestes. I hate that guy. Anyway, that's pretty cool that I had a teacher that did that with us, because I could tell you that story. I tell my undergrads that story too. That's something you can do when you have good material. And I would say that Aeschylus, pretty good material. I think I have good company to say that too. People you respect like Aristotle. My encouragement, and I doubt I have to encourage much, is that whatever grade you teach, whatever school you teach in, you find a way to incorporate into your storytelling these stories. I don't have time to tell you the story of Josh from Cal State, who didn't know any stories, but catch me later, I'll tell you that. We need our stories. And in my odd opinion, we have not improved on these ones. We can improve on pedagogy to this extent, not leaving these stories in dry and dusty tomes for 6th form British schoolboys and above. They're not going to be inspired by these like 4th graders are. To discover when they're well past the age that they'd ever be interested in them. Or preserving them for some college teacher to run through pedantically and suck the joy out of them. There's some good stuff here. You don't need to get bogged down in, okay, what declension was that? We've got to read these. Got to find a facility to enjoy enjoy the Latin. In other words, working with Latin poetry doesn't need to be an affair of simply translation or scansion. These are important skills. And the brief analysis I share here in the next several minutes that we've got, just to read a little bit, will point out some features of grammar and style that are of interest to philologists like me. But what will a second grader enjoy of Ovid? Quite a bit, I'd say. A sixth grader who hasn't yet gotten to the subjunctive mood, also quite a bit. You don't have to be fluent in Latin to enjoy this stuff. As classical educators of primaries, middle, and high schoolers, you have so much more at your disposal than my own teachers did, including Mrs. Roth. So be creative with this material. Brief overview of the story, and of which we're only going to look at 30 lines and probably far less than that. Minerva, daughter of Jupiter and virgin goddess of wisdom and justice and war strategy and weaving, after hearing a lengthy narrative of the Muses' victory over the mortal daughters of Pierus, who had outrageously challenged them to a singing contest, decides to vindicate her own godhead over a poor but proud young woman named Arachne. Guess what she's going to turn into? She travels to Lydia, that's the east, from the Roman and Greek point of view, to confront the girl who had herself arrogantly compared her skill in weaving arch to Minerva's. Disguised as an old woman, and gods in disguise is a problem through this, she warns Arachne of the danger of hubris, that's outrage, right? Assault and battery, or thinking of yourself more highly than you ought, to do Pauline Philippians 2 language. The girl answers the admonition with abuse and invites Minerva to challenge her in person. Discarding her disguise, the goddess evokes fear and worship from the nymphs and women around Arachne, but only belligerence from the girl. They set up looms. Do you know what a loom is? Okay, well, you can look it up. And each weaves a tapestry. You use a loom to weave a tapestry. Before we had 3D printers, see, this is how you had to do art. Let's see. Minerva's symmetrical and noble tapestry depicts her victory over Neptune for patronage of Athens. And that's important because otherwise we'd have to call it Neptune's. Athens, Greece, not Neptune's Greece, right? Athena, you get it? Athena, Athens. Did you learn something today you didn't know before? If you learn something that you didn't know before, that's why you pay college tuition. I don't care what it is you learn, but you got to learn something. My birthday is April 19th. Did you know that? Yes. Write that down. That's okay. Never mind. You laugh about as much as my students do. Okay, Arachne's tapestry. Excuse me. The center of the piece is Athena's victory. The corners depict tales of human hubris punished by the gods, and that's what we'll look at. Arachne's tapestry, to close out the episode, is more chaotic and depicts gods and the maidens they deceive under costumed appearances. And here's the end of the story. Arachne's tapestry is flawless, and Minerva rips it apart and assaults Arachne with her shuttle. A shuttle is something that you weave with in a loom. Huh? Okay. You're laughing like we should know this. I didn't know this. All that I learned about weaving, I learned from Ovid. The girl attempts to hang herself, but Minerva sprinkles her with a potion. Also interesting, why does she have to use drugs? And transforms her into a spider who still spins thread. There's the etiology at the end. But it's, of course, that might be the punchline, but it's not the buildup. It's not the most important piece of the narrative. If you're following along with the handout, did I offer an outline after that? Yes. Good. I'm not going to go over that. But look at it yourself. If you're interested in, hey, if I was doing this in Latin and I wanted to focus on something, hey, there's a little outline to let you know what takes the space and whatnot. After that, do I offer you a translation? Good. Let's just talk about this for a minute. A.S. Klein, Poetry and Translation. Anybody been to the site? It's free, man. Yeah. And he encourages its use. Give him credit. But so much. Is it just Ovid? No. It's everything. Everything from Homer to Petrarch, for crying out loud. This guy, what did he do on his weekends? You know, some frosted mini wheats, and then let's do Catullus. Right? It's like every single day this guy's translating poetry. Now it's in prose, so you see the prose translation there. That's only 145 lines of poetry. I know it seems like a lot because it's small print, but it's not very long. Enjoy the episode. Next to that is Stanley Lombardo's translation, 2008, the Hackett translation. This guy's just a workhorse. I use his Homer and his Virgil in my college classes. I think it's a very readable and poetic translation. Notice the cover doesn't have any nudity on it. I think it's a wonderful... I'm messing with you. Look, come on. No, that's a good thing. That's a good thing. Because these are salacious stories, right? You don't want Ovid illustrated. Don't do image searches, up on the board without looking at stuff first. I'm not saying it's healthy, but you wouldn't be doing Judith and Tamar, and you wouldn't be doing, there's some Dinah, or I don't know, the Levite and his porcupine or whatever. You don't want to do some of this stuff without checking out the images first. That's all I'm saying. Okay, so that's the Lombardo translation. I didn't get his permission to do that, but I did give him money once for coming out to Concordia University. He's retired now, and he just translates everything. Okay, what do I have next? Do I have some Latin on there next? Let's do some Latin. Do we have 15 minutes? That'll leave us 15 minutes to do Latin? This is Rebecca, my wife, she's like at Bible class, she's like, come on, Armstrong, get to the point. Let's do some Latin. And what I've got is just a little bit. We're going to do the Minerva Tapestry. And it's lines 70 to 102. This 33 lines of poetry. I'd say that's about right for a college class once a day if they're at the reading stage, intermediate to advanced. It's hard because college is hard. It's about right for an AP or fourth-year high school daily assignment, because this is beyond sixth form. If you got Latin kids that have gone up through what's the Memoria Press? Is first form, second form, third form, fourth form, and then you go to Henley 1 and 2. This is Henley 2, all right. But if you have juniors, they should be able to do this, and it's easier than Virgil. Frankly, easier than Catullus. But it's not easy. Don't think that, but it's about like that. Break the chunk, it's easier than Cicero. Most things are easier than Cicero. Break the chunks down that you'd use. For middle school or older elementary, or if you got first forms, just look at vocabulary and spelling. If you got first forms, look at first and second declension words and say, hey, look at that. There's a Greek accusative. No, don't show them Greek accusatives. Don't show them subjunctives, but show them, hey, look at that form of the verb to be. Did you recognize that? That's something you can do. I'm going to read this out. Anybody know how to scan poetry? You do longs and shorts for dactylic hexameter? You know how to find feet and caesuras and... Okay, it goes like this. Know then thyself, presume not God to scan. The proper study of mankind is man. Right? That's called a pentameter because there's 5 things in it. We call them feet. I count them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we've got an unstressed and a stress and unstressed and a stress, and that's called an iamb. That's funny, because there was a girl named Iambe, and she used to make jokes, and she got punished by a goss. So there's, that's way back. This is iambic pentameter, so it goes da-da, 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 da-da. Say, but soft, what light, through yonder wind, no breaks, it is the east, and Juliet is the sun, arise from sun, I don't like Romeo and Juliet. Right, so that's iambic pentameter. That's the heroic meter for English speech when John Milton's going to do the irremediable, and what's that called? It's in the sermon today, Paradise Lost. Right? That's the epic meter, and the couplet meter for Alexander Pope and Dryden and all those guys in the Restoration literature of England. That's not the heroic meter, though. That's a comic meter for the Romans and Greeks. And it's not even stress meter. We do it with quantity, long vowels and short vowels like that. And the heroic meter is not an iamb, it's in something called a dactyl. How about that? Bum, 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 bum. So how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 6 of them. That's what I call a hexameter. Everybody say hexameter. Hexameter. All right. Now, this is called a dactyl. Why is it called a dactyl? All right. Everybody look at your finger. Not your right one. Do the left. The left one makes an L. Look. Okay, then L. Look at your finger. Right out there like that. Go ahead. Get it closer. Not too close. Smell it? Don't smell that finger. You don't know where it's been. Okay, now look. That's an airplane joke. Now look at. What do you see? What do you see with your finger? You see a long and a short short, don't you? Which proves you're normal. It's good. Some people, I don't see that. Okay, so I got a long bone here, I got a short and a short, right? A long and a short and a short. And that's why we call it a pterodactyl, because that's a finger. A Greek finger is a dactylos. Isn't that wonderful? A Greek wing is a patero. A pterodactyl. It's a wing finger, because they got their fingers out here and they got wings on it, like that. It's a pterodactyl. So this line of poetry is called a dactylic hexameter. It's a dactyl is the foot, because it's a finger. The finger cannot say to the foot. Okay, so the finger, foot, right here. And how many of them? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And Homer did this in the Iliad. And it sounds like this. Bum, ba, ba, bum, ba, 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 da, pa, pa, ba, 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 ba. And you do that for 24,000 lines. And you got an epic. That's the definition. That's the definition of epic. All right. That's Aristotle's Poetics. Right? This is what it is. And if you do it for 15,000 lines, you got the Metamorphoses of Ovid. So let's just hear what this sounds like. Kekropia palascopoluma vortis in arche pingitit antiquande terrae nominelite. Bisix lestes medio sedibus altis. See, sometimes these shorts, they can substitute for a long. And it substitutes for a long, that's called a spondy. It's a spondaic foot or a spondaic line. It's kind of heavy and it drags and it makes it sound more serious. And then sometimes it's purely dactylic and it sounds light and airy and, you know, like different kinds of desserts. Let's take a look at those first couple lines first. Kekropia palascopoluma vortis in arche pingit. Pingit, that's a verb. That's why it's got a it on the end. It means he, she, or it is pingoing. What's a pingo? It means she, pingo, pingere, pinxi pictum. Pictum, what does pictum sound like? A picture, yeah, it means she paints. She illustrates. Who's doing the illustration? It's Pallas. Pallas is another word for Minerva or Athena. So the goddess is weaving something. See, the goddess weaves. What does she weave? She weaves the scopulum ma vortis. The scopulum is a hill or a rock. And ma vortis is a nice archaizing form of, you'll take the VO out. Ma vortis. Take the VO out of that ma vortis, and what do you end with?
Oh, Mars.
Mars. Yeah, it's the hill of Mars. It's Mars Hill. Where's that?
Michigan.
Michigan. Thank you. A for the day. See, thank you. This is good. It's Mars Hill. It's the Areopagus. It's that hill in Athens, way up top. There's the Agora down here. There's Mars Hill right there, and then you've got what's that high place called? It's Acro and it's Apollos. Oh, it's an Acropolis, yeah, all the way up to the top. And so this is where the lis is taking place. The litem at the very end of that next line, that means a lawsuit or the suit, the challenge, and it's an antiquam litem. Hey, what does antiquam litem tell you about the gender of the word lis litis, if you didn't know before? Now, you need to know something about genders if you're going to do this, all right? We only got 3 of them, contrary to most public opinion these days. There are only 3 genders. And what are they? They're feminine, masculine, and then the neither one, right? Neither one in line of the neutrum, right? Neither one. And so, which one is lis? If you see antiquam there, what does it tell you? I could have said antiquum. There's a U or an O there. But no, it's antiquam. There's an ah there, and it tells you it's femina. Yeah, it's an ah. That's a feminine. If you didn't know that before, see, now that's a lesson you can teach your kid. Even if they don't know that vocabulary, look at those. You just learned something. There's an A there. It's a feminine adjective. Those goes with feminine nouns. The ancient suit de terrae nomine, concerning the name of the land. Okay. If you know how to do this stuff, scan the poetry, it will also help to know that kekropia is a nice long A, kekropia. And if you have an ah at the end of an us adjective, that's a long A, it tells you it's a certain case. Some of you know Latin, some of you done first declension, us, e, o, e, or is, os, is, I, ama. Have you done that? You know those? Where's the long A show up in the singular of the feminine? Who said ad lib? No, you teach this stuff, though. You never teach this. You teach this stuff. See, you just took it away from him. Now he's not going to pass the class. There's always the sciences. Don't worry. I know it's not as exciting. It's hard being a Latinist. You know, the paparazzi are the worst part. People come up to me at restaurants all the time looking for my autograph. I'm just trying to have lunch with my family or dinner with my family. And you can't disappoint the kids, though. They say, can you conjugate this? Oh, okay. Get out of here. Okay. Okay, I got 5 minutes. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. So, bis, sex, kai, les, stace. What's bis? What's sex? Thank you. Yeah, let's not make this is PG-13. So bis sex. Bis. That means twice. Oh, did I offer you a? See, I offered you a note. These are just notes that came out of my own analysis. These are questions that I'd asked my first years, or these are questions that I'd asked my second years. How would you say once, twice? You'd say, well, what's once? Even Christ Jesus died. Apox, once. That's in Greek, though. This is Latin. How do you do that? Semel. Not semel, that's used to set cotter, right? But what's semel? That means once. How do you say thrice? How do you say 3 times? You say ter. Everybody say semel. Semel. Bis. Bis. Ter. Ter. Say femina. Femina. Semel. Bis. Ter. Femina. Yeah. We're going to let that sink in for a minute. Bis sex. What's bis sex? Well, it's twice 6. Thank you. Again, we're PG-13. So what is bis sex? 12. It's 12. Why didn't Ovid say 12? I mean, we can do that. You can do unus, duo, tres, quatuor, quinque, sex, septem, yada, yada, yada. What's 12? Duodecim. Say duodecim. Yeah, everybody say duodecim. Duodecim. Why can't he say duodecim? No, it's not because it's too long. It doesn't work with this. There's 3 short vowels in a row in duodecim. Can't do it. He's got restrictions. It's not nice to be a formalist, not just do anything that comes to mind. Notice what else it does. It makes them all long. Bis, sex, kai, les, days. Why would that be important to drag this out with the gods right there? It makes them majestic. It makes them majestic in the next line, Augusta gravitate, with august gravity, with august seriousness, with august, holy, revered, oh, dude, I better not have my hair out of place or whatever. That's gravitas. Do I have another question on that?
Maybe might be hinting at?
What might Ovid be hinting at by using the word Augusta gravitas here? Any ideas? You know who the emperor was named Augustus at that point. Maybe he's playing with the link between the emperor and the divine machinery that they, kind of shared. He does that a few times during the epic. I guess I've been wasting too much time. I didn't get through much Latin. Do you feel like you learned any Latin today? Well, we've got a couple more minutes. I'm not gonna stop just yet. There's some other things in here that I want to point out. And I'm happy to work through any of this with you, Latin-wise, poetry-wise, or any of that, because it's fun. It's a very fun reading, and there's a lot of great stuff to point out. But before I end, I do want to just take a couple more opportunities to think about how to engage ancient literature, ancient mythology, ancient Ovid's Metamorphoses in particular, and that's one of them is explorations in art. In the Renaissance, and during the high medieval period, not a whole lot of representations of Ovid, but early on in ancient Greek and then, Hellenistic and Roman art, you're going to see a lot of representations of the kinds of stories that Ovid tells, but also in the Renaissance, of course. One that I would offer from this particular story is the story of Europa and the bull. Titian has the original. It's in Boston right now. If you flip that over, you see the black and white on the top. And notice that you can probably see that in miniature 100 years later in Las Hilanderas by Diego Velázquez in a painting that is in the Prado in Madrid. Do you see those weavers with that spinning wheel? And they take the curtain back, and what do you see? You see Minerva or somebody in a galleom on her kapiti, just like in the poetry, and she's about to beat a young girl, and behind her is a piece of art. And what's that piece of art? It's actually a copy of Titian's Europa and the Bull. Because when we do art, when we tell a story, we are never alone with it. We never start being creative, because every story, every narrative, everything we tell is at the same time a product of an author figure, as well as a cultural moment that's going to modify it somehow, as well as a tradition. And that's what I'm getting to at the end, is a tradition. Telling the story a certain way. Ovid tells them fast, but he's not the only teller. You're going to tell these as well, and you're going to retell them. And so, as my last piece, my swan song, so to speak, what I'd offer you is something I discovered in kind of prepping and thinking, how do you do Ovid with little kids? I met a woman online in my search for this by the name of Ursula. I met her at Bible class. She reads all my texts, and she reads all my search history. I met a woman online. Man, I stepped in that one. See, this is why I didn't want to be recorded. There's a recorder right here. This is going to come back and haunt me.
Met a woman online.
Ursula Dubitkovsky or something like this. She's a children's author in Australia. And I haven't read her other stuff, but she's got 8 plays for elementary that are inspired by Ovid's Metamorphoses. Got the story of Icarus, the boy who could fly. Of course, he didn't swim. That was the problem. There's the story of Erysichthon, the guy who was hungry all the time. He ends up eating himself, and she takes that story and actually makes something rather delightful out of it. That's not Bowdlerization. That's not censorship. That's not a book burning. That's called, I'm going to retell the story as appropriate, because we continue to retell these stories culturally and age appropriately in all kinds of ways. There are ways to do this. And so what I've copied out for you, with her permission, her kind permission, is Spider-Girl, the story of Arachne, which differs interestingly from Ovid, but retains a lot of the interesting spirit of it as well. She does the story of Baucis and Philemon, the hospitable pair that had Jupiter and Hermes in, and everybody else got flooded in the second flood, but not them. They end up being their priests. And the focalization of her narrative in that play that she's doing for second graders is the poor goose that almost gets cooked in book 8 of the Metamorphoses. And that's pretty cool. Is it my favorite reading of it? No. But I'm going to share that with my college students, because I know that they're going to teach someday. And they're not all going to teach, adults like I do. Some of them are going to teach interesting people, like my wife does with her kindergarten class. So I want you to look at Arachne, Spider-Girl, and then realize that I got that for free too. And if you write Ursula, I left her email on that handout, she'll graciously give it to you. And if you're embarrassed to do that, spend the $5, get it on Kindle. Spend the $8 and get those 8 plays from Amazon in print, because she's got that available. But she's very sweet. And she was just happy I was going to talk to real people today. I don't usually get to do that. When you talk to dead people all day long, like I do, it's nice to talk to the living from time to time. And I'm sorry I spent too much time with shtick. I'd be very happy to talk to you more. I know I'm 3 minutes past time, so I'm going to just close like this. This is my email. This is my name. This is what I do, and this is where I do it. My computer's up here if you want a copy of this to download for yourself and take a look at things. By all means, come and put your email into my Google Drive to share it. And as soon as people are in there to share, I'll hit enter and you'll have access to it immediately. And other than that, we have to do something. We got to go to a plenary meeting. Where's that at, Pastor Kieser?
Gymnasium.
That's in the gymnasium, the gymnasion. So let's go there. And if you want to talk to me afterwards, please talk to me. If you feel like you need an appointment, talk to Bogle or talk to Rebecca. I'm going to be pushing her around. You don't need one of those. Come talk to me anytime. All right? Thank you for your attention. That's